Hello, I'm Eric Snodgrass, and thank you for watching today's weather outlook for the southern region, brought to you by Nutrien Ag Solutions. Well, I wanted to begin with a look at the jet stream in the day here on Friday. We've got a pretty strong Pacific branch of the jet stream that's really taking aim on California before splitting here into this large ridge out across western Canada and a southern branch that goes across Mexico and then over toward Florida. Well, this flow pattern is quite important for our setup moving forward because split flow like this across the western United States really impacts the southern region. We're going to be watching for little pieces to kind of come across California, like this little shortwave right here, that can invigorate these low pressure systems that come racing across the southern region, increasing our chances for precipitation, although it's not looking to be extremely wet, but maybe some chances for some stronger thunderstorms. So this same flow pattern, when we look over the last 3 days, has really, again, targeted California with that southern branch kind of soaking parts of southern Florida here for a lot of spring breakers. Meanwhile, we saw this little low pressure system that went through parts of Nebraska, hitting that flooded region there, moving over toward the eastern Corn Belt, dragging a cold front that came through Arkansas, came through parts of Oklahoma and the panhandle of Texas here. And we also saw that bigger system we talked about in the last few videos that kind of took off to the northeast as a deep coastal low here, hitting North Carolina before it did so. So this was kind of our setup, but a lot of our peanut cotton belt, this region right in through here, where we're also trying to plant corn and soybeans this time of year, was relatively dry over the last few days, although it was a little bit cooler than average. And I want to talk about temperatures first this time. Here's a map put out by the Vegetation Impact Program, put out by the Midwest Regional Climate Center, and it's a great resource to be checking out here. What they do is they make a map that shows whatever time of year it is, the susceptibility of a freeze on vegetation. You can kind of look at the color bar here. And of course, we know that the southern region is quite susceptible to a freeze by the time we get, to the very beginning of spring here, the end of March. So the question is, do we see anything in the longer term forecast here over the next 15 days or so that suggests we could get some pretty cold air that gets pretty far to the south? So let's start off by taking a look at that forecast. Remember, so much of what controls our surface temperatures here is going to be the interplay between the surface and the upper levels of the atmosphere. So let's begin there. We're going to watch this little trough sitting right here. This is going to be our major weather maker through the weekend. This trough just snuck through California, bringing in some heavier rainfall and even some lightning and thunder to California. And it's about to do the same from Texas over to Arkansas and eventually over toward the southeast. Now, the trough that you see sitting here is what's kind of kept us relatively cool compared to average over the last several days, and also brought that big nor'easter up the east coast. But let's play this forward and let's look for any systems that might sneak through to bring in some colder weather. Now, in my longer range updates, I said that if we get this ridge that's been sitting over the west coast to migrate toward Alaska, one thing that does is that tends to allow much cooler air to kind of seep into the eastern third of the country. That was my one worry. If this ridge did eventually migrate toward Alaska, that's a cooler signal for the east coast, and we're going to see it do exactly that. So let's kind of take a look and animate this one forward. As we progress through the weekend, let me just step you back here. It's going to be watching that little shortwave trough coming out of the Four Corners region, going into the middle section of the country. This little guy right in through here. That's going to be causing some problems Saturday, Sunday, and early into Monday. But overall, look at the ridge moving toward Alaska, such that by Monday, what we end up getting here is we end up getting this high over low flow. So the flow of the atmosphere is doing something like this out west. Now that's important for us across the south because that's going to redirect a lot of our low pressure systems here to be coming into Northern California. When they do so, they kind of sneak across the country. Now for us in the middle part of the United States and the southern states, this kind of feels like an unblocked flow, such that we tend to get regular weather systems. We're going to have a huge warm up that's going to come here by the end of March. I'm talking about March 27th, 28th, 29th, because as this trough sweeps through, look at the ridge out ahead of it, bringing in really, really warm conditions. But it's going to sweep through. And the big question is, as we finish March and get into the beginning of April, is this trough deep enough to introduce some pretty cold temperatures here to the southern region that might cause some problems with our vegetation? Certainly the first week of April, by the current run here by the European model, does tend to hold a bit of a cooler bias for the middle part of the country. But we do see that by the time we get through that first week of April, ridging overall across the east will keep much of the southeast warm, but we could see some cooler risks as we get back over to Texas, Oklahoma, when we think about our southern region here. One thing's for sure, the Pacific Ocean is going to keep lining up these storm systems that are going to come across the United States here. So temperature anomalies first. We begin Friday with a cool bias across the southern Gulf Coast here, getting over to the southeast with slightly warmer than average conditions out ahead of this next system over in Texas and New Mexico. As I click play, sorry that went kind of fast there, getting us through the beginning of the weekend, so things are pretty decent as we get into Friday. These temperatures aren't too much cooler than average across the southeast. But we can see here by that once we get into Sunday, there it is. This is our next system moving through. It's got a lot of warm air out ahead of it here, while we're still hanging on to a cool bias across the southeast. But as the system moves through, look at the warm up ahead of this. But then after it goes through, we get our first cool down. Now we're going to see how much cooler than average this gets on the 26th into the 27th here of March. But our next big system comes sweeping through right there. This is now all the way out to Friday the 29th. And then there's a pretty sizable cool down that happens after that as well, such that the first week of April is looking to be a cooler start to our new month here. But the question is, what does our freeze probability look like? So this is from the European model. We're looking every day, so once a day, at the probability of having a temperature at the surface be below freezing. So that's the color coding over here. It's probability. So the more toward the reds you get, the higher the probability. And that's going to play fast, but let's kind of step this back here. We see that as we get into Saturday morning, mainly our freezing temperatures stay in the high elevations here in the Appalachian Mountains, and much of the rest of the southern region stays above freezing. As we progress into the weekend and then getting into early next week, things are relatively warm, even such that by the time we get into next Tuesday night into Wednesday, we see the cooler temperatures here, potential for freezing, really going to be confined here to the eastern Corn Belt and getting into Tennessee and Kentucky and the higher elevations of North Carolina and Virginia. But what I'm concerned about is what happens after. So there's the big warm up on the 27th, 28th, and 29th. Then the cool down that comes by the time we get to the end of the month, so this is now April 1st, you see that the model's hinting at getting some pretty chilly air down here, giving us a non-zero chance at getting into the northern part of the southern region here, some pretty chilly temperatures that might edge their way toward freezing. Now, these probabilities are low, but it's just something to be on the lookout for here, okay? It's just telling me that the pattern will be cooler than average, and I'll keep a close eye on this for you. What I'm not seeing right now in the longer range models is something like we had a few years ago. I think it was 2015, where a deep trough sat right here and just froze everything in the southeast. We're not seeing that setting up here as we get toward the beginning of April, but some cooler weather might be coming through. Now let's turn our attention next to precipitation. Storm Prediction Center's watching in the day on Friday for the potential for some stronger storms here in the panhandle of Texas and Oklahoma, stretching down into West Texas and parts of New Mexico. As that system progresses east, we bring our chances for storms here into the kind of the Oklahoma, eastern Texas, getting into southern Kansas area, and then by Sunday we're going to watch the tail end of this sucker kind of move through Arkansas, bringing in our severe threat, well, our strongest storm threat. So let's kind of look at this every hour here by our high-resolution NAM model. Mid-morning on Friday, we're going to be watching for storms to kind of fire up in this region along the front, and then throughout the day. Let's play that again. Throughout the day, we see those storms kind of progressing through the panhandles, possibly stretching all the way down here into Mexico. So this is our main corridor for stronger thunderstorms on Friday. As we progress, you'll see this low kind of tighten up right here, bringing quite a bit of rainfall from Oklahoma, getting into Kansas before curling back into Colorado. But as the main front drags through the southern region here, we're going to watch on Saturday for the stronger storm threat to be progressing into this area. Again, parts of eastern Oklahoma and western Arkansas. And as the system slowly progresses, as we get into Sunday, you'll see the thunderstorm threat kind of getting down here into Arkansas, southern Missouri, and along the lower Mississippi River Valley. And this next system kind of moves toward the northeast and really kind of eliminates the threat for severe weather across the southeastern states. So getting you through midday on Sunday, because of the dominance of higher atmospheric pressure here, things are going to stay relatively dry, but this high pressure is going to be feeding these stronger storms into this area that do progress over toward Arkansas throughout the beginning of the week. Looking a little bit longer term here with our European model, let's just get past this first system because we talked about it quite a bit. So now I've got you into Monday. We see the scattered showers and storms Monday night pressing into anywhere from Mississippi all the way to North Carolina, pushing on through. But again, severe threat at this point is not looking. We're not looking at strong to severe storms. Higher pressure then dominates after that. Now this is the setup. With this big dome of higher atmospheric pressure sitting along the East Coast, we're going to be putting a lot of warm air advection, bringing in that warm air out ahead of this next system on the 27th and 28th. And then there you see it get going. So this is our bigger system pressing through. And it's behind this one that really cooler air kind of comes through. So our pattern stays relatively active after this weekend's system kind of pushes on through. In terms of total accumulated precipitation, you see things start off here on Friday, they progress over here by the time we get into Saturday and Sunday, and then eventually make it all the way over to the East Coast here, over to the kind of the Southeast, the Carolinas by the time we get into really Sunday into early Monday. Along the Gulf Coast, though, things stay relatively calm in terms of bringing in too much precipitation. So this is not a wetter pattern by any stretch. If we just look over the next 14, 15 days, we can see the influence of this system here, but really we're going to keep a drier bias here where we grow a lot of cotton peanuts right down in this area. So that's something to pay attention to here, while California gets really slammed with quite a bit of precipitation. So looking at this in terms of percent of normal, let me just look over the last 30 days. Very wet in the Mid-South, causing all that flooding we've talked about so much. That is certainly coming down the pipeline here. To let you know, for those of you that are farming right here around the lower Mississippi River Valley, we're expecting a lot of snow melt over the coming days here in the north central plains, and that is all just going to funnel down the Missouri River into the Mississippi right in through here, and it's all coming down. So we're going to continue to see our major flood threat for quite some time here along the lower Mississippi River Valley. But really, over the last 30 days, we've kept a drier bias here along the Gulf Coast, and we've been talking quite a bit about that. And that's why when we look at the recent changes in our drought monitor, we'll check this out, March 7th versus March 21st. While we've eliminated a lot of the drought out here, see that? We've started to pick up a little bit larger area here where we're abnormally dry. And that's just something we're going to have to keep a closer eye on as we progress forward. One of the big reasons for that, well, the first 5 days of April, behind that big system coming through, yeah, we carry a bit of a cool bias. This isn't cold, but it's a cool bias here for the southern region. Cold for here, but not so cold down there, across the southern region. But it looks as though by the time we get to mid-April, we may favor this pattern, which I've been discussing quite a bit in our long-range forecasts. And if that's the case, while this keeps this region quite active, I'm just going to have to keep an eye on how strong this southeastern ridge is. And if we continue to see a slight dry pattern here, especially for coastal regions where it is already dry. So that'll be something we'll be discussing in the coming weeks here as we every Wednesday release our long-range weather forecast. But with that, I'm going to go ahead and wrap up this southern region forecast. We at Nutrien Ag Solutions hope you look forward to our next southern region forecast coming out on Tuesday. In the meantime, have a great weekend, and we'll talk to you again soon. Thank you.